This week's topic is what one does want in a leader. At this point in the class, many of you point out, and rightfully so, that there may not be such thing as a good or perfect leader. Any of the good leaders that we can think of do have faults, and do have shadows, and do have weaknesses. And that idea, and the idea of understanding oneself fully, is vital to leadership development and transformation. One of my intellectual heroes, Carl Jung, touched on this a great deal in his books and lectures. And he argued that to transform into authenticity, one needed to confront, understand, and accept their own darkness. That the authentic individual needed to see and accept their own nature so profoundly and have a unity and absence of conflict within their nature. To be the kind of person that can feel angry or vengeful or guilty without being ashamed. Jung understood that an integrated and what he defined as individuated person was not somebody that had eliminated the weaknesses and darknesses and what he called shadows from their lives, but rather someone who could feel all of these things and had no recriminations against themselves for feeling that way. And this transformation towards authenticity or individuation came, according to Jung, through the acceptance of one's own darkness. If you want to guide an individual, if you want to lead an individual, you have to first empathize with that individual psyche. And you can't do that when you pass judgment. We can't change something unless we accept it, according to Jung. Condemnation or judgment doesn't liberate. You become the oppressor when you condemn or judge. Jung contended that when we judge others, we're actually projecting parts of ourselves. So we can't accept others fully until we've accepted ourselves fully and completely. There's a great scene in the show Breaking Bad, and for those of you that haven't seen the show, it's about two guys that cook crystal meth, one young guy and an older guy. And at some point, the young guy ends up in rehab. He isn't just a dealer, he also is addicted to the substance himself. So he's in the rehab center, sitting there in a therapy session, and the therapist says something to the effect of, a huge part of rehabilitation is giving up this notion that you have to be perfect, that you have to get everything right, of being right, and just coming to terms with who you are actually. Which from a Jungian perspective fits very well with the Jung ethos. And when the young man comes out of rehab center, he tells his partner, I really took that to heart, and I really thought about it. And you know what I realized? I am the bad guy. I cleaned up, I stopped using, but I'm still a dealer, and that's what I do. So it's this part of the individuation process, of this process into authenticity, where you have to look at your shadow and say, this is what I am, this is where I am, and I have to accept it. And that's what I'm going to be, independently of the normative value system out there in society. And from there, one can take the next step of consciously controlling and working with that weakness or shadow. But the first step is really about being willing to look it in the face and just accept it as part of yourself. And the thing about shadows, according to Jung, is that they're very difficult to face directly. Jung argued that stories were very good at helping individuals face their shadows indirectly. And that's what I love about the art of film. Our shadows can reveal themselves in the stories that the film is portraying. And when someone else is struggling to be human and confront their demons, we subconsciously wrestle with our own. A great source of strength in my life is seeing or reading about the failures of some of the leaders, famous stars, etc. that I look up to. It helps me face my own darkness when I see those that I admire wrestle with their own. All great people have shadows. Elvis was a junkie, and he did die of an overdose. Frank Sinatra and John Lennon were bad, mean drunks and alcoholics. MLK and Nelson Mandela were womanizers who, by many accounts, had numerous extramarital affairs. Steve Jobs was not only a huge jerk to a lot of his very close friends and coworkers, but he was also an awful father who resented and disowned his daughter for most of his life. So the demons rage in the rich and the powerful and the famous just as much as they do in the poor and the unknown. But history and the hard truth of our heroes is what we have to struggle to remember, even when the legend may be more pleasing. It would be nice if Frank Sinatra had been a great guy with just a few regrettable drunken evenings, but it was a lot worse than that. It would have been great if JFK and Tiger Woods were family men with just a sometimes wandering eye, but the truth there, too, is a lot more complicated. But none of this needs to diminish our admiration or our love for these people. Humanism is made from a faith in humans, as they actually are, flawed and real. Whole people, made up of broken parts, just like everybody else. So to transform into authenticity is vital to life-affirming leadership. And again, one way to transform is to face our shadows and weaknesses. One powerful exercise in facing a shadow is asking a loved one to name your personal leadership faults, and just being open to hearing them and accepting them as a part of yourself. Another point to consider is that transformation takes time. Studies show that individual transformation takes 3 to 5 years. So a seed that is planted today can take up to 5 years to finally mature. So accept your weaknesses. Have compassion on yourself. And that's the beginning.